These are 7 of the scariest stories ever told on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Starting with the Joe Rogan Experience number 2243 featuring Julian Lennon. In this episode, Julian Lennon talks to Joe about how there have been many things in his life that he has experienced that are unexplainable. He first talks about white feather. While Julian Lennon was in Australia, he was given a white feather by an Aboriginal tribal elder. Now, the most bizarre part about that is that Julian's father, John Lennon, once told him that if he ever passed away, he would send Julian a message in the form of a white feather. So Julian receiving this white feather a few years after his dad passed away inspired Julian to start the White Feather Foundation and dedicate his efforts to making a positive impact on the world. Now, Joe Rogan says that the white feather is so on the nose that it is almost impossible to dismiss, leading him to talk about the concept of the divine or the concept of being something else. This prompts Julian Lennon to tell a story of how he saw something completely unexplainable while he was in Mexico. Take a listen.
And I had this experience where I saw quite clearly. I was on my own again, of course, and I was looking out to the sea. This was down in Mexico, and I was literally just kind of drifting off, and I, without question, at least I believe so, I saw, to me, what looked like Mayan Indians, see-through, dancing around a fire. And I went, what the? I mean, I really kind of got a little scared. I went, what am I seeing? How am I seeing this? Why? Anyway, it was all a bit weird. And at the breakfast table the next day, and I'd never been to this place before. I was invited down as a guest, and the hostess said, how did you sleep? Is everything all right? I said, well, I don't want to say anything, but I think I saw some see-through Mayan Indians last night. Oh. You didn't know that this was built on a Mayan Indian burial ground? I said, shut the front door. She said, that freaked me out, firstly. And then of course, she comes back into the room with a tray of artifacts, spearheads and a few other things and other tools that they use. But then she did one better. She goes and brings in a book that's a very, very thick book with the generations of Mayan and civilizations that have been there before. And so she says, have a look. And I'm flipping through the book, and I see the exact headdress and skirt that they were wearing and the exact colors of those headdresses. It was two-tone. It was like an earth color and a sky blue, kind of that color. And that's in a particular arrangement on their headdresses and on their on the skirts. And I said, that's them. And they said, oh yeah, that was a particular era, and that's where the property was built on, and I just went, well, okay, all right. That just, to me, I'm sorry, that just says between that and the white feather, and there's one or two other incidences. I just went, yeah, there's so much more that we don't know that lives and breathes and exists around.
This brings Julian Lennon to talk about how he thinks that human eyes can only see so much. There could be so much more that exists, but we just simply have no clue. Joe Rogan says that you have to go back to the idea that at one point, eyes didn't exist. About 600 million years ago, simple organisms like single-celled bacteria had light-sensitive proteins that helped them detect light and dark. It wasn't until around 100 million years later that the first compound eyes and camera-style eyes appeared in early arthropods and vertebrates. Joe thinks the idea that eyes allow you to see, so therefore you are seeing everything, is ridiculous because before eyes existed, there was no perception. So why would we assume that this is all that our senses can interact with? Pretty freaky to think about. This can sort of be tied to the string theory, which is a theoretical framework in physics that suggests the universe has more than the 3 spatial dimensions that we perceive. According to the string theory, there may be up to 10 or 11 dimensions, with the extra ones being compactified and imperceptible to us. Also, some mystical traditions and esoteric philosophies suggest that higher dimensions exist beyond human sensory perception, inhabited by spiritual beings or alternate forms of consciousness. On the Joe Rogan Experience number 2145 featuring Colin Quinn, Joe Rogan asks Colin Quinn if he has ever heard about fake doctors, which are essentially people who pretend to be doctors and open up practices and operate on people. Now, surprisingly enough, Colin Quinn says that he once went to a fake doctor. The fake doctor that Colin Quinn went to was an infamous criminal named Dean Fiello. Now, Dean Fiello pretended to be a dermatologist, and he would operate on people without ever studying dermatology or having any licenses to do so. In 2003, a woman by the name of Maria Cruz sought treatment from Fiello for a lesion on her tongue. After a procedure in which she was reportedly given an excessive amount of anesthetics, she ended up dying. Instead of reporting the death, Fiello hid her body in a cement-filled suitcase in the garage of his New Jersey home. When authorities began investigating, Fiello fled the country, eventually being captured in Costa Rica in 2004. He was extradited to the US in 2005 and later pleaded guilty to first-degree assault in 2006, receiving a 20-year prison sentence. Take a listen to Colin Quinn's experience with Dean Fiello.
Somebody tells me I had like a cyst on my arm. So they go, oh, I know a guy that'll take it off. You know, he's a good dermatologist, Dean something. Anyway, so he sets up an appointment, and it's on a Saturday at a doctor's, Park Avenue. But it's Saturday. And I was like, oh, cool, I'm off Saturday. I go over to his office, I walk in. When I think back now, it was like nobody, no receptionist, just him. He goes, hey, I'm just working Saturday on myself. He goes, I let the receptionist off. I was like, oh, cool. I go in the office. It's kind of dark, you know, but it's doctor's office. And I don't know, I guess he worked for the doctor and he had the keys or something. And he slices the thing off. It kind of hurt. It healed very badly, but it healed. But it was not a great job. I remember thinking, I'll never go back to that guy. He overdid it, you know. It wasn't, the Novocaine was weird, whatever. Anyway, like 4 years later, Dean Fiello.
Now, initially, Fiello was expected to face a murder charge, but in 2006, he pleaded guilty to first-degree assault as part of a plea deal. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. During his time behind bars, Fiello reportedly expressed remorse for what happened, claiming he never intended to kill Maria Cruz. Now, after serving 17 years, Dean Fiello was released from prison in 2023. He had spent nearly 2 decades behind bars for his crimes, but his release sparked renewed public interest in the case. On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1922, featuring paranormal investigators Sam and Colby tell Joe Rogan about a doll that is more haunted than Annabelle. If you aren't aware, the Annabelle doll is one of the most famous haunted objects in paranormal history. Now, the story of the Annabelle doll began in 1970 when a woman purchased the doll from a hobby store as a gift for her daughter, Donna, a nursing student. Donna and her roommate Angie kept the doll in their apartment. Soon, strange things started happening. The doll would change positions when no one was looking. Notes reading "help me" would appear on parchment paper, even though no parchment paper was in the house. And at times, Donna would find the doll in different rooms from where she had left it. One night, a friend named Lou, who had always felt uneasy about the doll, had a terrifying experience. He woke up paralyzed, seeing the doll moving toward him before he blacked out. Another time, Lou claimed the doll attacked him, leaving deep claw marks on his chest that mysteriously vanished hours later. Now, apparently, the Annabelle doll is the second most haunted doll in the world, with a doll named Robert being number 1. Take a listen.
Have you ever heard of Annabelle?
Yes.
So Annabelle is a movie franchise. It's based on a real doll. So the real doll is like apparently the second most haunted in the world, and Robert is the number 1 most haunted in the world. So what really gets us is when people have like their own personal experiences that they come and talk about. what we didn't realize is how many people had experiences with the doll.
Yeah.
They calculated to more than 10,000 people have written in apology letters to Robert to ask for forgiveness because of the curse that he put on them. 10,000 individuals. Like, maybe even if 50% of those are both, there are 5,000 people out there that genuinely believe they have been cursed by this doll by taking a picture of it.
Robert the Doll is a legendary haunted doll housed in the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. The doll originally belonged to Robert Eugene Otto, a young boy who reportedly treated it as if it were alive. Over time, strange occurrences were linked to the doll, such as unexplained giggling, the doll seemingly changing expressions, furniture moving on its own, and people hearing footsteps when no one was there. Now in 2020, Ozzy Osbourne and his son Jack Osbourne visited Key West for their show, The Osbournes Want to Believe. While there, they saw Robert the Doll in the museum. Ozzy reportedly refused to respect the rules and joked about the doll, which some believe led to supernatural consequences. Shortly after, Ozzy suffered a serious health scare. He had a fall that aggravated a previous injury, requiring surgery. His health struggles worsened for months, leading fans to speculate that Robert had cursed him. Some even urged Ozzy to send an apology letter to Robert to lift the supposed curse. In an episode of The Osbournes Want to Believe, Jack revealed that he personally sent an apology letter to Robert on behalf of his dad. The letter reportedly asked for forgiveness in case they had offended the doll.
We've been in a lot of haunted places, but it's different when you're dealing with a haunted object, because it's not like, oh, the building and the vibe we're in is haunted. It's more like this specific thing that's in front of me.
And what is the story behind this doll? Like, why is it supposedly haunted?
So this guy it's like a 3.5 foot tall doll. It's like a life-size type of doll. It's really weird. He gave it to his son, and the son's name was Robert Otto.
It was like Gene Robert Otto.
Gene Robert Otto, or Robert Gene Otto, and he gave his first name and his clothes to this doll. And so the kid and the doll became best friends for years and years and years. And he basically embodied this guy and just became Robert himself. But over the course of his childhood and all the way up until I think he left his parents' house to go to college, he would have horrible things happen to him because of this doll. And this doll was allegedly taken from like Germany at this the shop, the company.
It was like it was called the Stife, the same company that created like the original teddy bear.
Yeah.
Created this doll.
So from the original teddy bear company, he brought this doll from Germany to give this guy in Florida, and throughout his entire childhood, like chairs would be moved, like all these horrible bad luck things would happen. Like to the parents, it would seem like he was arguing with someone in the room, and they'd hear two voices. And then when the parents would run into the room, it was just him and the doll. And
Which is creepy because the parents would say that they heard like their little kid's voice and then like an older, deep, like man's voice.
Oh, Christ.
Talking back and forth. And apparently that was Robert. But the big theory about Robert is that he was also one of these like egregore in an object sort of creatures, I guess, puppets, I guess you could say, because Gene would always blame everything that he did wrong on the doll. So like if furniture would be like all around his room or whatever, his parents would come and try to ground him, he'd be like, no, Robert did it. And so all that negativity going towards this doll for his entire life, like, is why people believe that it has like evil to it. Like it manifested this evil.
One of the most chilling stories involves a woman who openly mocked Robert while visiting the museum. She laughed at him, made fun of the legend, and refused to ask for permission before taking a photo. That night, she experienced a series of nightmares where Robert appeared, staring at her with his beady black eyes. Over the next few weeks, her car broke down unexpectedly, she lost her wallet and phone under bizarre circumstances, and she fell down the stairs, injuring her leg. Terrified, she wrote an apology letter to Robert, and according to her, the strange misfortunes stopped shortly after. Also, museum employees who work at the museum where Robert is housed also reported disturbing events related to Robert. Some claim Robert's facial expressions change when they look away. One staff member said that they heard tapping inside of Robert's glass case, even though the doll hadn't moved. Others report feeling uneasy or watched whenever near the doll, doll. While skeptics believe that these stories are just coincidences, many people refuse to take chances with Robert the doll. Visitors to the museum follow the rules carefully, making sure to ask permission before taking a photo and treating Robert with respect. Now, would you guys ever visit Robert the doll, or do you think it's too risky? On the Joe Rogan Experience number 2033 featuring Matt Rife shares his experience ghost hunting at the Conjuring house. The house, located in Harrisville, Rhode Island, was built in 1736 and has a dark history tied to tragedy, deaths, and alleged witchcraft. Over the years, multiple families lived there, but many suffered mysterious deaths, including murders, suicides, and drownings. The most infamous spirit tied to the house is Bathsheba Sherman, a woman rumored to have practiced witchcraft in the 1800s. She was accused of sacrificing a baby to Satan, though no official evidence confirmed this. Legend says that she cursed the land before her death, vowing to torment anyone who lived there. In 1971, Roger and Caroline Perrin moved into the house with their 5 daughters: Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April. Almost immediately, strange things started to happen. Objects moved on their own, chairs sliding, doors opening and closing. The family saw shadow figures lurking in the corners. They heard whispers and disembodied voices at night, and the smell of rotting flesh would suddenly fill the air. The parents contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, famous paranormal investigators. Lorraine claimed that she sensed a demonic presence in the house. The Warrens conducted a seance, hoping to communicate with the spirits. Instead, things turned violent. Caroline became possessed and spoke in strange languages. She was thrown across the room, screaming in pain. Roger Perrin demanded the Warrens leave, fearing things had gotten worse. The family never got rid of the spirits, but they endured the hauntings until they moved out in 1980.
I will say I wasn't as scared as I've been in a lot of places we've been. There is some kind of solace to the house, but you get to know the history of it, and it does make sense that there would be something here. I mean, it's on some ley lines of water underground. There was wars fought there. There's apparently bodies buried on the property in the walls of the property structures and stuff. There's a lot of history that goes into it that just makes for kind of the perfect storm for some creepy shit. But I didn't witness anything that was that insane. Some items moved, some cars rolled off of the children's dressers a couple of times on cue. And that's the one thing I do pride ourselves in these videos is so often we get absolutely nothing because we don't fake anything. So you only get to see the highlights. Like there's so many times we'll go to a place that is so notoriously haunted and we'll be there for 10 hours and get absolutely nothing. And it sucks, but that makes when something does happen that much more valuable. It's so much more impressive.
Now, Joe Rogan and Matt Rife start talking about how maybe if you already know a place is haunted and you are going into a place like the Conjuring house expecting to see ghosts, then maybe your mind plays tricks on you and makes you see things that are not actually there. Joe Rogan also brings up how when you are in a confined space, your brain has a heightened sense of being trapped. For example, it's like if you were in your basement at night and you are about to walk up the stairs and you turn off the lights behind you. Your brain almost makes you scared of what could be behind you in the dark, so you hurry up and rush up the stairs. Sometimes you even feel like something is chasing you up the stairs. Now, Matt Rife relates to this.
We did the USS Hornet up in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And we had the whole ship to ourselves, which I was so excited about because I love military stuff. I love history. I was so excited to go there and just witness it. And they sent me by myself on basically a game of hide and seek where I had to go find them in the ship somewhere after I had to count to 100 by myself. It was the most terrifying place I've ever been because if you've never been in like the bowel of a ship, it's so unfamiliar. Like doorways don't look the same. You know, you have to step over them and everything. There's so many pipes and everything sticking out. It's such an unfamiliar environment, especially in the dark. It's terrifying. You think I can't possibly run away from something in here. There's too many obstacles. You don't know if that's a wall or a pipe or something peeking around to like look at you. It's terrifying because of exactly that. You feel so trapped.
On the Joe Rogan Experience number 2213 featuring Diane Boyd, Joe and Diane get into a conversation about the woods and how scary the woods can be. Now, Diane Boyd has spent 4 decades studying and advocating for wolves in the wild of Montana, so she is no stranger to being and living in the woods. Before she tells a scary story of an encounter she had in the woods at her house one night, she tells Joe that there were 2 times in her life where she was was actually terrified in the woods. She first briefly talks about how one night she just had this feeling that there was something out in the woods either spying on her or just around her. She almost knows for certain that whatever was out there was human because being around wolves and other animals, she has never felt scared, but whatever was out there that night scared her. This prompts Joe to talk about how if you've lived in the woods alone, it would be super scary to see somebody else out in the woods. It's not like if you live in a city where you are, accustomed to seeing people. In urban areas, it's common that you see people very often or even interact with them. But if you lived somewhere remote, it's uncommon that you would see people. So when you do see somebody, it makes you question what they are doing out there and what their intentions are. Now, Diane goes into detail about how one night she had two men come to her house in the middle of the woods looking for no good. Take a listen.
So I was in my cabin at night and the dog started growling. I had very big dogs. I always have dogs. And I looked out my window and it was winter and it was cold and I could see a couple of guys out there lurking around, and I was in the middle of nowhere. And then it kind of digressed from there. So I for the first and only time in my life, I pulled a gun on these guys.
Really?
Yeah, I was in danger.
What were they doing out there?
Well, they came to pay me a visit.
They knew who you were?
They called me by name, which was really freaky. So you think somebody in the woods walking around scary? Wait till you see somebody who you don't know who it is and they call you by your first name. That's freaky.
And what did they want?
I didn't find out because I pulled a gun on them.
Wow.
I drove them off. And it was terrifying to me it was not terrifying at the moment because I was absolutely focused, like predator focused, calm. But after they left, I started to shake and kind of after the adrenaline surge happened.
Were they menacing? Were they?
Yeah.
Yeah?
To me.
But with the way they were communicating with you?
They were drunk.
Oh.
Yeah. It wasn't good.
And so how did they know who you were? Do you know?
Oh, it's a long story, but I was working up there. I was kind of a novelty, a young blonde woman. I was only about 25. Living alone, studying wolves, and at the time there were other people coming and going studying wolves, but at that winter I was alone, and I had been working, it's a long story, I was working behind the customs station right on the Canadian border, and they were hauling logs down out of Canada, bringing in the customs station. They would have to transfer the logs to an American truck, and then the Canadian trucks would go back, and I temporarily took a job as the knot bumper at the log deck landing, which means my job was to run a chainsaw, trim off the branches, trim the length of the log to exactly fit the log bed. Anyway, so I was around. So these loggers knew who I was, and I was, I was cordial enough. But it was two of those guys.
The woods have always been a source of mystery and fear for many people. There's just something unsettling about being surrounded by dense trees with no clear view of what's ahead or behind you. Now, there are some specific reasons why the woods can feel so creepy, starting with isolation and the fear of the unknown. Deep in the woods, you're completely alone. If something happens, there's no immediate help. Your mind starts imagining things lurking behind trees or watching from the darkness, and the feeling of being trapped or lost can trigger primal fear. Secondly, strange noises and silence. The woods can be eerily quiet, which makes any small sound, like twigs snapping or distant whispers, feel intensified. Wind rustling through the trees, distant animal calls, and sudden unexplained noises can make your imagination run wild. Some people even report hearing voices, footsteps, or laughter in supposedly empty forests. The forest can also feel a lot creepier because of the disappearances and urban legends. Many unsolved disappearances have happened in forests, like in national parks or the infamous missing 411 cases. Cult activity, serial killers, or even paranormal legends like the Wendigo, the Skinwalkers, or the Blair Witch add to the fear factor. Some places like the Aokigahara forest in Japan are known for dark histories and ghostly encounters. Lastly, the feeling of being watched in the forest. In the woods, your senses are heightened. Even if no one is there, your brain tricks you into thinking that something is watching. And this is a primal instinct. You know, our ancestors had to be cautious of predators hiding in the trees. When you turn around and see nothing, it only makes the feeling worse. Now, after knowing all of this, would you ever go alone into the woods at night? On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1726, featuring Chuck Palahniuk, Chuck shares the very strange story of his father's murder. For context, Chuck's dad had answered a personal ad for a person who was looking for a boyfriend. The ad that Chuck's dad responded to was labeled Kismet, which in Arabic is a term for fate or destiny. So Chuck's dad responded to this ad and met up with the woman named Rita, who was a lawyer. Rita mainly worked in the prison system. Chuck's dad grew very fond of Rita. He saw her as very bright and very intelligent. Now, Rita had an ex-husband, and they were split up because the ex-husband had abused Rita's daughter. So Rita was in the process of pressing charges against her ex-husband. Now, Rita met her ex-husband through prison. He was a prisoner, and Rita was doing legal work for him. So Rita helped him get out of prison, then married him. He abused her daughter, and she was working on getting him back into prison. And then Rita met Chuck's father. After Rita had divorced her ex-husband, he told her that if he ever caught her with another man, he would kill them both. Take a listen.
My father was going to pick her up, and she was going to stay at his house in the mountains until the time of the trial. As he was going to pick her up, he was going down this mountain road on his property, and a giant boulder broke free, and it rolled down the hillside and it blocked the road. He couldn't get out. So he spent the day with this a lever, forcing this boulder off the road. And then he took a couple extra hours and he made a sign that said Kismet Rock so that he could label this boulder as a kind of landmark for when he brought her back to sequester her. And he labeled the rock to surprise her. And then he went to pick her up. And when he went to pick her up, the ex-husband showed up and he shot my father. And my father and the woman took refuge in her house, and the man set fire to the house, and the house eventually collapsed. And the coroner says that they were both dead before the fire got to them. And the coroner says that because of the angle of the shot, my father probably took about 20 minutes to die because the bullet ruptured his diaphragm. So with every breath, he would have been accumulating air between the lung and the diaphragm. And so every breath would have been more and more shallow because his lungs would have been more and more constricted by this air above the diaphragm, but that eventually he'd suffocated. And all of this sounds horrible and tragic. It forms this fantastic pattern in my father's life because my father, when he was very small, he lived in northern Idaho with this enormous Ukrainian family. And his father went kind of crazy one day. This is all public record. I've talked about this a lot. But his father took a rifle and walked around the house and tried to kill him, my father, and ultimately killed killed his wife, my father's mother, and then killed himself. But my father's earliest memories are of hiding underneath a bed as his father walked around the house in logging boots with a rifle, calling his name, trying to get him to come out so that he could be killed. And so my father spent his entire life sort of looking for his mother because as his father was trying to kill him, he was trying to find his mother who at that point had been killed. And so my father really had this kind of serial pattern with women. He was always looking in a way for the woman. And ultimately, he was shot by the man with a gun in the way that he would have been shot when he was 4 years old. And one of the uncanny things is that their bodies were only preserved because a bed on the second floor of this structure, as it was burning, the bed fell over their bodies and insulated their bodies. And my father had escaped his father by hiding underneath a bed when he was a small child.
Chuck Palahniuk's story of his father's murder is one of the craziest stories I've ever heard in my life. The fact that the ad that Rita had put out was labeled Kismet or Fate, and the fact that there was this boulder that rolled onto the road and blocked Chuck's dad's car just as he was leaving. If that boulder hadn't been there, it could be very possible that Chuck's dad could have made it to Rita's house before the ex-husband did. There are just so many weird coincidences in this story. Now, Chuck doesn't believe that his father's murder was just some random thing. He thinks that it was some aspect of his father's life that was, coming full circle and was finally being completed. It's just actually wild. On the Joe Rogan Experience number 1518, featuring David Choe, David shares an extremely scary hitchhiking story. As a young artist with little money in the late 1990s, David Choe traveled across the United States by hitchhiking and train hopping. Now, David explains to Joe that when he would hitchhike, people would usually pick them up because, one, they had a long drive ahead of them and, they wanted someone to talk to, or two, they would just pick him up because they wanted David to talk to them. David says that the first hour or two of being in somebody's car after they picked him up was, always small talk, just asking basic questions about each other and whatnot. But David says that something switched when the driver knew that the ride was about to end. The last 10 minutes of the ride is usually when the drivers start to open up more and either say things that they have never said before, or they confess to something that they have done in the past. Now, David thinks it's because the drivers know that they will, never see him again, so they feel that he is like the perfect person to get something off of their chest. David has heard people confess to things like drugs, incest, and even murder. But David then shares a story where instead of just hitchhiking and being in the car with somebody for a ride, he actually stayed at somebody's house who had picked him up. Take a listen.
I was in the deep south, and John Wayne picks us up, cowboy guy. 10-gallon hat, Damn, you boys look, hot out there. Get in the car. And he's telling us about shrimp po' boys, and, he works on a offshore oil rig. And it's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and it's just 2 weeks off right now. So he's like, where are you guys headed? And we're like, we're just trying to get to New York. New York? What you want to go there for? A bunch of queers out there. I don't know. We want to check it out. You guys want to stay at my house tonight? Like, this guy looks like grandpa. Just cowboy boots, cowboy hat, just big gut. Like, he's a dude.
Right.
Yeah, I'm young. I'm 17 or 18 at this time. We get to his house in a tiny town in Louisiana. Deep South.
Okay.
Like, we get in his house, Die Hard movie collection, Rambo movie collection, shotguns, and
lube.
Just a dude, just a man's man. And he has in his part-time job is an anesthesiologist.
Part-time anesthesiologist.
Part-time and then part-time offshore oil rig. And I'm, this is summertime, deep south, covered with like grease and mosquitoes, living outside on the road, hitchhiking. He's like, you guys want to take a shower? I'm like, fuck yeah. I'm the first one in the shower. And then I come out, I got the towel wrapped on. He's like, he made us like a frozen pizza or something. And there's a protest on the television. It's San Fran. This is 1993 or 94. There's a protest of something with gay people in San Francisco. And they're all protesting. And he's watching it. He's like, I'm like, what? He's like, I'm queer. You never see me out there protesting. And I'm like, oh, shit. And then my friend Brian, who's covered in grease and dirt, he hasn't showered yet. And I'm like, oh, shit. And I started getting my clothes on. And, it's one thing to be gay, and then it's one thing to be picked up by like a
big gay guy with a cowboy hat who takes you to his house.
So he's like, hey, Brian, it's your turn. Why don't you take a shower? No, I'm okay. I'm all right. You're filthy. Why don't you get in there, take a shower? He's like, no, I'm all right. I'm okay.
So David and his friend have a little conversation, and they try to discuss among each other what they're going to do. Are they going to stay at this guy's house overnight, or are they going to just leave? David's friend suggests that they will stay at the man's house. They figure the guy's old, and there are two of them, and they could take this guy on if, it came to that, and they were exhausted. And at this point, the old guy was already falling asleep in his chair. So David and his friend decided that they would just stay the night and that they would leave first thing in the morning. They also agreed on taking shifts sleeping. One of them would sleep and the other would keep an eye out. Some time passes and it's David's turn to keep an eye out for the old man. David notices that the light in the old man's room was still on and David could hear him walking around his room. After some more time passes, David was on the brink of falling asleep and his his friend just wouldn't wake up to keep an eye out while David slept, so David just decided that he was going to try and stay awake the whole entire night.
Sometime around 5:30 in the morning or something, my eyes are closed, but you know when you feel someone? So he comes out of his room and he's standing there and I could see, and then I go, oh shit. And then I grip the knife and I go, this is it. It's going to happen right now. And he just leaves. He goes out the door and I go, oh, and then I wake up Brian. I go, Brian, let's get the out of here. He's like, what's going on? He's like, dude, he just left. He's like, okay, I'm going to take a shower then. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, if he went to the store or something, like he's not going to
get some duct
Yeah,
tape.
he's not going to be back for a little. I'll jump in and jump out. I go, dude, let's just go right now. Like I don't know if he was jerking off or what. Like I had my eyes closed, but he was standing right there and he's like, I'll be quick. So he runs in, takes a fast shower. We get our clothes on, and like just as we're walking out, he's like, hey, he like pulls in. You guys leaving without saying bye? I just went to the market to get some eggs for breakfast. And I'm like, oh, dude. So I'm like, I have the knife in my hand the whole time. I go, like, it's that thing where I'm a people pleaser, you know, like I'll even put my own life at risk to, like, this guy went to the store and got eggs for me, you know, like, yeah, sure, we'll have some eggs. So we go in and the guy starts talking about his wife and how he works on this offshore oil rig with like a younger dude. It's just two guys running this whole oil rig. And the other guy just talks about how much he hates gay people the whole time, not knowing that this guy is.
Wow.
And then he just like all the other times I've been picked up, it starts opening up about how he was married, he has a bunch of children, and then he figured out he was gay. I could see it. He knows we're on our way out. He's never going to see us. Let's just let it on. You boys look so cute on the side of the road there last night. And it was like, I was so like, I'm so lonely. I don't get to, you know, you don't know what it's like to be a queer guy in the deep South. Man, when I came out this morning and I saw you guys sleeping together, you guys on the couch, you look so beautiful and perfect. And I'm like, oh my God, dude. And then he says, I thought about just, you know, if you guys wouldn't mind if I just touched you a little bit. And I'm like, what the And, you know, we've once again, I froze. I'm like, oh yeah, cool.
So after the man said that to David and his friend, they obviously got out of the man's house. Now, as they were walking out of the man's house, David heard some of the kids in the neighborhood start laughing, almost as if the old man has tried this several times before. Now, David earlier in the episode was talking about how in the 1970s, hitchhiking was super popular, and then all of a sudden, near the 80s, nobody did it anymore. Well, hitchhiking was very popular, especially from the 1950s to the 1970s. Many young people, including, you know, students and travelers, couldn't afford cars or bus tickets, making hitchhiking a cheap alternative. And during times of economic hardship, like the Great Depression and the 1970s oil crisis, hitchhiking was a practical way to travel. Also in the 1960s and 70s, the counterculture movement embraced the idea of free-spirited travel, adventure, and communal living. The road trip became romanticized in books and music, making hitchhiking a rite of passage for young wanderers. Also, public transportation wasn't as widespread in rural areas, and long-distance travel was expensive, and more people were just willing to pick up hitchhikers, making it common and accepted way to get around. But just as quickly as hitchhiking became common, it also quickly declined. High-profile crimes like serial killers targeting hitchhikers in the 1970s and 80s, and an example of this would be like the hitchhiker murderer, spread fear. News and media sensationalized dangers, making people less likely to pick up strangers. Also, with time, car ownership increased and transportation alternatives were introduced. More people could afford personal vehicles, reducing the need to hitchhike. Cheap bus services like Greyhound and later Megabus provided budget-friendly travel alternatives. Also, some states implemented laws restricting or banning hitchhiking, especially on highways, citing safety concerns. And then, of course, societal norms changed. Society became more individualistic, with people being less trusting of strangers. Urbanization reduced the need for hitchhiking as more people moved to cities with better public transit. But anyways, these have been 7 of the scariest stories ever told on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Let me know down below if you guys would like to see a part 4, and make sure to subscribe with those post notifications on.